gives me the chance to introduce also Rabbi Lipman, because you grew up and have been socialized in the States, and I guess you still observe the current affairs very, very closely. Does the endemic use of Twitter by President Trump, has this changed, in your perspective, the political dialogue in the US? And that the fact that there is basically no more consensus about ethical standards because they are constantly violated by the president itself as a function.
Well, as an Israeli politician, and thank you again for having me, I'm going to remove myself from specific elements of American politics. But there's no doubt that in all of my work, especially now with an organization called Honest Reporting, where we're constantly monitoring what's happening, there's no doubt that there has to be real initiatives to crack down on the companies that own the social media venues to clearly see anti-Semitism as hate speech. We see so many examples where, whether it's YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, where on the one hand they'll crack down on certain forms of hate speech, but not on things that are anti-Semitic. And we're working very hard on that process to make sure that there are clear guidelines, exactly what is anti-Semitism, what is not to be tolerated, and we work very hard throughout the day to monitor to make sure that anti-Semitic things are taken down. Just as an example, in July, Louis Farrakhan gave this horrific anti-Semitic speech, and it was on YouTube, and there's no reason for it allowed to be on there, and we were part of a process to get that removed. We have to be constantly vigilant about that. I agree with Roger. You're not going to be able to change people who believe in this classic anti-Semitism to change, but we can be active to make sure that it's removed from the public platform, to make sure that it's not spread to those who are not part of that camp at the current time. And that's where we really have to focus our efforts. We at Honest Reporting work very hard on that, but that's where collectively, I believe, all groups in the world who are against hate, against any kind of racism, against any kind of discrimination, can join that battle to make sure that anti-Semitism is included in that category.
And I think with the same language, if you debunk them, this for me has more effect than with a lot of money to make very professional videos to show that are the real facts, because I think it's a contra result.
If I could jump in for a moment.
Please, Rabbi Lipman, please.
I think there are 2 points that I want to make. One is it's hard to, from my perspective, to debunk someone who is willing to believe that the Jews are out to control the world and we're in control of all the money. It's hard to engage in that conversation from my perspective. However, people don't want to be in the camp of hating others or racism or discrimination. Most people will say racism is wrong. That's why, for example, when the Black Lives Matter movement really took off in the United States in the last few months, and then we saw some of the leaders that were involved and some of the spokespeople that had some anti-Semitic statements that were made, it was critical to point out, and there were a lot of celebrities who helped with this, especially in the sports world, that you can't fight against racism and also support anti-Semitism. To show that hatred against a group of people is a hatred against a group of people, and discrimination is discrimination, and you have to show the parallel between the two, because most people do not want to be in the camp of I'm discriminatory or I'm racist. And if you show that anti-Semitism is a form of racism, that goes a long way. That's point one. Point number two, though, which is on a certain level the elephant in the room, and that is we cannot remove the issue of Israel from the equation. I know that's not our topic for the panel. I don't want to get sidetracked by it, but we do have to realize that there's a world that we live in where, of course, people can criticize Israel just like anyone can criticize any country. But there's a line that's often crossed where it's just outright anti-Israel bias, where it's not legitimate, reasonable criticism, and it's masked as being anti-Israel, but it actually is an anti-Semitism. I've been in discussions all around the world, and it took me a while to come to that conclusion. But in the world today, being anti-Israel might be politically correct, but being anti-Semitic is not. And we're seeing a growing movement of anti-Israel where the real sentiment behind it is anti-Semitism. And that has to be exposed as well, because you can tell people, criticize any country you want. Of course, that's legitimate. You can disagree with the policies. But whether you're right-wing or left-wing, the Jewish people have a right to a state. They have a right to some element of this land, and the movement to totally delegitimize that and to remove them from this land, that has to be exposed for the anti-Semitism that it is.
It plays a role, but that's not at the center of the discussion.
There's no doubt, though, that you were talking before about how to reach the younger people. There's so many creative ways. I mean, Roger was saying how in the traditional ways you won't get to them. I know that certainly in our organization, Honest Reporting, we have younger people who understand how the videos work, how to reach people, different mechanisms of getting people information, even if it's not in a traditional, here, I'm going to sit down now and lecture you about it. We're reaching over 20 million viewers over the course of this year in the age of 18 to 34 in very specific areas. That's the way you have to do it. There are many organizations that are out there doing so. My dream is that all can work together. Can you imagine if everyone with all of their audiences got together, and not just Jewish organizations, but organizations throughout the world, Christian organizations and others that all support this effort. If we work together with our resources and got messages out in the 30-second video and the 1-minute videos and just hammered home the same way, we could be very effective, but we're not doing it in a strategic manner at the moment.
But Lipman, to come back to what you said a couple minutes ago, or did I got it incorrectly? You also advocate, let's say, more tough stance against platforms distributing this kind of content.
Absolutely. On the one hand, a strong, unified battle, a legal battle against these platforms to make sure that they are removing the content, they have a clear definition of anti-Semitism, and they follow it, and they're monitoring it, and they're making sure that it's removed. We can't have a situation where, for example, where Twitter allows the leader of Iran to tweet about the annihilation of destruction of Israel, which is outright anti-Semitism, no matter how you spin it, and yet other people are not allowed to print other things. Today, a member of Knesset, tried to tweet about a humanitarian issue with prisoners that are in captivity in Hamas, and that wasn't allowed. We have to fight against that on the one hand. On the other hand, a very proactive educational approach, but one that meets the needs of the 21st century, meets the attention span and the interests of the younger generation.
What about the First Amendment and free speech in America? You are entitled in the States, in Switzerland, in Europe, it's different, to every opinion. Of course, if you promote falsehoods, if you promote things or you write things that are obviously wrong, you now can be cancelled by Twitter or by Facebook. But if it's an opinion which you don't like, in America it's protected by the Constitution.
That's one of the things that we're fighting against. In America, it took some time because the companies are in America, like you said, in Silicon Valley and California, for even things that were, let's say, detrimental to youth, things that were dangerous to youth. It took some time to fight against that to make sure that was removed. Now it's viewed as if it's dangerous, if it's going to hurt someone, we'll remove it. So we have to show that hate speech, whether it's against Jews or any other group, is in that same category and can lead